Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word in danger of losing its meaning altogether. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Kevin Bailey. Kevin is a professional engineer, angel, and VC investor, and one of Canada's leading experts in bringing new hardware products to market. More than 1,000 entrepreneurs, startups, and global corporations, such as Ericsson, Motorola, and Acer, have brought product ideas to life under Kevin's guidance. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. I know it'll be great for our listeners, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot from it as well. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, you're welcome, Jared. It's actually a real pleasure to be here with someone who actually understands our world or my world. And we can get into some really interesting conversations.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Let's dive right in. So what, to your mind, is innovation?
I gave this a little bit of thought because I know your podcast is focused on innovation. And I'm going to say that for me, it's three areas of conversation. One is deep thought, individually and expertise. Deep thought is really important as part of the process. And the second one is a team. Individually, deep thought is great. Now, a team of people with diverse knowledge and experience take that deep thought and apply it. And so team and team processes is really important in terms of how they collaborate together, how they engage, and how they share their view of what they think is the third point, which is about focused on an opportunity, which is to improve something, task-based. But it's also around experience, novel, wonder, things that innovation can be. Experience is not just task-oriented. So depending on the nature of what you're focusing on, it takes one, focus, two, team, and three, individual expertise and deep knowledge in particular areas, because you're navigating competing trade-offs for the most part. You're looking at staying focused on the wonder, whether it be a task done extremely well where a person just feels, wow, I used to do it this way, I do it this way now, and I just love that experience. It happens to be a device. My world is devices. So it's a mixture of the devices. It's a mixture of the software and the app and what's happening in the cloud nowadays, right? We are steeped in system products, not standalone products these days.
Right.
So those three things, I think that's what defines for me innovation, is to focus in an area and really be creative about an outcome that's adding value to somebody from an experience point of view or from a task point of view.
Experience and tasks. There was so much here. I mean, I love your definition for the structure of it, first of all, and then the sort of balancing of the thinking and the task, the sort of doing. And I think sometimes we don't always get that mix right from an innovation standpoint. Sometimes we think more than we should and don't do enough, and that has consequences. And sometimes we do more, do things sooner before we really do all the thinking. But one word that you mentioned really jumped out at me, and it was apply. You talked about teams applying things. And what does that mean? I know people look at innovation processes from a lot of different angles, but I really think there's a lot to that word and the way you used it.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. It's key and critical. None of this goes well without an orchestra leader, without a group of people that are focused in an area. Over the years, I've been doing this since the early 1980s. So I've been helping people develop physical products, electronics, web connected, some of the early stage smartphones we were doing in the 90s, into the world in the mid to late 2000s. But ultimately, the first ones were developed around a user-centered focus with large development teams, with large corporations, applying the techniques of how does a team focus on exactly what we've talked about. So in that experience set that I've done literally, I've worked with hundreds of large companies and thousands of small companies over trying to do the same thing over and over of innovation and taking good intentions and a perceived need and turning it into something useful.
Right.
And then creating a business around something useful, which is another hard thing to do. But the idea of the team, the idea of the model of how do you as a group of people think about that team and how it functions well. You can think of elite sports teams. There's some really good trainers out there that understand how you motivate individuals in elite sports, team sports and individual sports. And there's some really good models there. Theater is a great place to focus too, where there is this creative need by the participants and directing people in a particular area for a performance, which is the product in this case, is a great model as well.
Mm.
I've seen a really interesting one recently, and I'm going to bring a person in the ERT, emergency response training area, where it's a very orchestrated. There's strong parallels to what we do in design with limited time and need for creativity and opportunity assessment, risk assessment. So the ERT area is a really interesting area. People that are looking at modeling methods through which you motivate your team, facilitate your team discussions, and move towards end goals with competing trade-offs needed, and making sure that the diverse experienced people are in rooms while you make those diverse trade-offs, because that's so much of design falls apart because you don't have that. There's another area of dog training. If you've ever worked with a dog trainer, you go in with your dog and you've worked hard at training them, and they'll sit if you want them to. There's an area there of nonverbal cues, which is amazing. If you've ever seen a good dog trainer, the dog walks into the room and immediately there's a reaction to that person. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's this ability for a dog trainer to very quickly change a dog's behavior. And if you think about teams, there's a lot of nonverbal that goes on with the leaders of teams that helps people to focus in particular areas. So those are four strong models through taking some of those techniques as you plan and organize teams. It helps towards that centering in on the objective innovation and removing some of the subjective and the ego and the other things that cloud and confuse teams that are trying to be productive.
Oh, those are such great examples. It really comes to life in those examples. The thing I love about theater and the emergency response training and the dog training is that they are non-competitive. And I think we often, in the world of commerce and business, tend to go to competitive analogs. And I think that has an unintended consequence on how we view teams and cross-functional teams in a big corporate environment. And I would imagine it could have a consequence in a small team environment as well.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And the way I think about that is that we can't ignore our competitive tendencies. It has to be acknowledged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are literally more capable, more experienced in certain areas, and they need to shine. So at an individual project level, balancing competitive with collaborative, and that's where the sports related thing comes in, where you know that you're on game one, game two, game three, game four. There's room for the ego to exist, but not continually, right?
Right.
Ego needs to be shared. People bring value, and that's the reason why you're building this team. If you're dragging a whole bunch of people along, you haven't got the right team yet.
Right, exactly.
Different people shine at different times, and to really try to acknowledge that as the facilitators. To make sure that over time, over the sequence of games, which are the products that you build, that recognition transfers from the facilitators to a collaborative atmosphere between the competitors. And that's a careful migration or progression with teams that are highly effective and trying to balance that and removing players that aren't working in that, even though they may be super bright in one area. Bring them in, but don't give them any sort of command or control over that team situationally if you're faced with that particular challenge.
I see. So a lot of times you hear sort of the poles, the extremes of the conversation around ego and competition are killers for collaboration and innovation, or you have to be hyper competitive and hyper focused on winning to win in innovation. But what I'm hearing from you is a useful and I think elegant balance to say competitive spirit in moderation in a structured environment to facilitate cooperation and collaboration is a good thing, a healthy thing.
Yeah, and I would say you've got to watch the word moderation where you're trying to unify everything. It will pop up from time to time and celebrate it.
Right.
But it becomes points of time versus a continuum, right?
Exactly.
It's important, right? People are driven by certain needs and really get the best out of that.
Right.
Don't try to damp it down or remove it because you're really destroying some of the fabric of innovation, right? In terms of how a person motivates themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the Hogan personality assessment. because it does do that compared to other assessments. It splits out the motivators as a section of the assessment and says, not just about what your strengths and your development areas or opportunity areas are, it's also about what motivates you to win. And it places no value judgment on any of those motivators.
Yeah.
If it's power, if it's money, if it's prestige, if it's altruism, it's just information to understand how to bring out the best in that person and not a value judgment on what should be the right thing to motivate someone.
And I find open conversations with teams that trust each other as time goes on to really recognize, and you can go through a behavioral bit with the team and give people a sense. Some people like things organized. They can contribute in certain ways. Other people are very comfortable with the complete absurdity and exploring things that aren't. And to really recognize those talents together are really powerful. And that a person recognizes the other person doesn't have that, because many people try to make things, I want you to behave like I behave, or how I see the world and things.
Right.
Just to break down that misconception that that's a better way to go and to celebrate the diversity and bring it back to the objective, which is what you're trying to do together, right?
Right.
Get rid of some of the noise. And here's how we're trying to go forward. And I think it helps facilitate discussions as people are saying, more of this and less of that. And
Yeah.
this is value, that is. And then trying to keep objective data-based conversations versus subjective, I know better conversations.
It sounds like that might be where the deep thought comes into play as almost the thing that you can nucleate those conversations around, that you can kind of base those conversations on. You spend the time thinking about what the group is trying to accomplish and all those things. And that, I would imagine, makes the orientation and management of team dynamics a bit easier.
Yeah, that's a really good example. When I said deep thought, if we have a team of 5 and one of them's a facilitator, the leader, the deep thought that they're going through is, how do I get this team to function better?
Right.
The deep thought of the person doing the industrial design, for example, and how a user perceives the art that they're creating, their deep thought needs to be focused in their areas of skill. Then you'll bring in the idea that if they interact with other people, you see a problem, that it might help, and they'll spend a bit of time thinking about it, and maybe they'll try some things out. But that's not where their deep thought is. Their deep thought is things that motivate them and their experience set that allows them to bring excellence into the conversations.
As you think about team dynamics and teams you've seen that have been successful, not successful, and as you build teams to accomplish things, is that facilitator role a seat on the team? Is it a second hat that you give someone who's already on the team? How do you think about that facilitator, owner of team dynamics responsibility? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, totally. Now it gets a little deeper into how we've evolved as a company. We're 30 people. We have probably 25 projects on the go at once in some form of the development stages. And
Wow.
so any given person may be working on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects in different roles. And so that confusion state and making an efficient process through which clients can get people's time when needed, but they move on to other things when they're idling or waiting for other things. So now you're into a process model, a people model.
Mm-hmm.
What I've evolved to is the old model, the model that I've brought through my training in larger corporations, which is a dedicated product manager, a dedicated account manager, sales related, product development related. There's lots of models out there that do that. What happens if you can't have those people full time? What do you do? How do you make this most efficient? Well, you can train designers and engineers in those roles.
Okay.
Engineers tend towards the project management, but they can be trained into account management and sales. So how do you bring that responsibility into them, allow them to develop those skills? And so in our resource allocation, as new projects come in, we have a triage where we actually work with the best fit for clients, for product managers that facilitate a team. They're also a team member. They may be doing project management part-time. Typically they are.
Right.
Facilitating, interacting with the progress of a development. And account managers are there to ensure that the sales focus and the client representation of what's getting done focused on, because the clients interact in our business, clients interact with us constantly. So we have to separate the conversations of product development, which is things are happening. That's the exciting, emotional, look what we're doing type thing, to the mundane administration of, we budgeted this much. Where are we on the burn? What changes have we made? And the account management does the facilitation of client interactions financially and administratively. So doing that dynamically separates some of the roles in terms of how a team works. And you still have a team leader.
Right.
that's focused on product, but you also have a team leader that's focused on accountability for output and delivery. And the two have to work in lockstep. And it makes for a very efficient model.
I see. Mm. Yeah, I can imagine that would be very efficient. I would imagine it could also make your talent acquisition process very important. I've worked with a lot of engineers over the years, and I can think of some who would embrace that way of working and thrive in it. I can probably think of more that would not necessarily be a good fit for that model. So, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a challenge, especially as you bring up engineers that haven't had the practice. And what you do is you give them practice. We don't hire these people in. You bring people and you bring them with mentors and you work with them on the goal for the ones that are interested.
Mm.
And you would be surprised how many people are interested once they're shown that it's not all on their back. They're there in a nurturing environment that allows them to develop their skills down that path. I would say 1 in 100 say no.
Mm.
Where if I had just thrown them in and said, go do it, you're on your own. Because we do so many projects,
Right.
there's the ability, we even meet in groups weekly and we talk about the things that went well and didn't well in other projects. So they get advanced learning, even though they haven't gone through it yet with customers or with certain situations, they're getting cross pollination of the full experience set of the entire company. And most of our people are 20, 30-year veterans of this world of software, hardware, physical designs.
Sure.
So very quickly we can steer people towards best way forward. And it turns out in our customer satisfaction where they love it, right? There, people go, wow, I didn't know that we could find this type of environment where we can go from 0 to 100. And we're not doing everything. We're bringing our expertise into their goals because typically they understand their customer, their goals and what they're trying to do from a business perspective. And we're constantly aligning that as we go. And sometimes it doesn't work because we can't find a solution that meets all those needs. But the groups are doing it objectively, including the client, to say, okay, stop. And usually that client comes back with something else that says, okay, now I get that I've got a team here that I can plug in, but I've got this another direction I'd like to go where we've changed our thinking.
Mm.
And they're back in doing it, but it's that interactive collaboration that not only at the team level, but at the client level that makes it such an interesting model for collaborating and innovating.
Right. Yes, for sure. To me, it sounds like a psychologically safe environment, what you're describing, the way you've set things up. And in an environment of psychological safety, I could see people being more willing to step outside of their known world and their existing and current skill set. I think the challenge is that, not for you, but the challenge in adopting this model for other companies is, I think, creating that psychologically safe environment.
I'll add to that, Jared. What I stumbled across was that psychological safety can't be an excuse.
Mm.
What I see, though, is ego and self motivation, because everyone in our teams are self motivated, is that they can see that it's okay to stumble. It's okay to make a mistake. There's people around you that can support that, and you'll open the door being seen as less than perfect or on a path towards greater experience and acknowledging it as a group that that's what we're all in.
Right.
The best people in this company make mistakes, and we make sure everyone shares that.
Right.
We made a bad decision here. Now, what do we learn from it? And to get away from the pointing and the idea that you failed at something and that is the lasting impression of I don't want to do this again versus the you missed the mark here, right?
Right.
Have you done it differently? Well, maybe or maybe not. This is a situation. Now let's move on. What are we going to do next time? And you get that growth and learning where it's a more of a collaborative where you can call it safe, but you're called out on the fact that you made a mistake.
Mm.
You have ego, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that again, but you're not put in a corner for it.
Right.
You're supposed to share it with other people so that all of us don't make that same mistake. You get this sense that you're contributing by making a mistake versus it's a negative.
Ah, right, right. I see. I see. Yeah. I spent some time in plants, kind of working on innovation stuff. And one of the things I picked up in bringing new products to manufacturing environments are these 1 point lessons or these conversations they would have at the beginning and the end of shifts where they're saying, here's something that didn't work. This is what we took away from it. In an environment where it's expected for you to talk about what didn't work and there isn't this attribution of personal failure to the outcome.
Yeah, the whole continuous improvement thing.
Yeah.
But the thing that is sometimes people just aren't good at stuff. But then to say, acknowledge, let's not put you in that situation again, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And they recognize with honesty and with compassion, they recognize, like, yeah, I just don't like that stuff. I'm not good at it, whatever. Great. Well, let's utilize you here. You're great in this area. It just opens that door for the plant mentality. I've worked with many plants where there's really creative, innovative people on the floor that say, I've been looking at that problem forever. I know how to fix it, but there's no window opportunity and there's no motivation and there's no incentive to actually share in the conversation and be acknowledged for actually helping on the improvement and to make sure that that process goes as smoothly and as collaboratively and as motivational as possible with that person so that the next time around, because they're the creative people.
Right.
They're the people that, think problem, solution, problem, solution. You want to find those people. Those are your innovators.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. You don't create an innovation department and then label those people the innovators if you want an innovative culture
Right.
and one that reinforces that thinking and that mindset.
Yeah, totally.
I wonder, as you're talking about opportunity in your definition, you also made a sort of distinction between the process of getting to something useful and the process of making a business out of that useful thing. Can you talk about the distinction?
Sure. One end of that scale is Apple. Infinite budgets, focused on markets, large development teams. You're not constrained by having to buy a manufacturer, change their processes completely towards your goals, and innovate around a materials or a processing or a tooling technology. And that's open for some development teams. Most development teams don't have that. And the idea that you can make any product you want, that you can put in any feature you want, new and innovative, you've seen it on Apple, you'd like to put it on your product. You need a really strong technical experienced team to say no. That's not available to you. A business constraint says that we have to go at it a different way. We have to create that product feature or that a different way because these are the available parts and components and process technologies and manufacturers that will do this for you in the limited volumes that you have or the budget that you have available to do the product development, whatever it is, but there's business constraints around the solution. And to have the conversations as you're configuring that product, not just letting design teams go and say, hey, make us the perfect thing that user and task set will accept. You need to do that. You want to know what the end game is, what is the perfect thing, but then you work backwards from that towards what's pragmatic, what can deliver on most of it, what elements of it are critical to keep and what elements you can let go of because the business says we can't do that anyways. And to do that in a real-time fashion as you're doing product configuration. And you need experienced supply people at the table and occasionally during that process, but really experienced design people, engineering people from the relevant disciplines, whether it be hardware, software, mechanical, depending on what you're trying to take on, what you're trying to develop.
So that makes perfect sense to me. And I think the leap from useful to a business probably looks different and feels different for an entrepreneur than it does for, to your point, for a big budget, large team kind of company. I would imagine it could be easier for an entrepreneur to convince themselves because this is useful, it can be a business. But I'm hearing in your language that there's a distinction between those two things. So how would you help us, an entrepreneur or a founder, not fall into the trap of it's useful, therefore there is a business for it?
Yeah, so design of product, design of business. As an entrepreneur, you're taking on both those tasks at once. And if you're not careful, you're taking on design of process too, which means you've envisioned parts that can't be made by a third party yet, and that you're going to have to create machinery or change your process somewhere in the world. Now you're doing design of process, which Apple does constantly.
Right.
So design of product, design of process, and design of business. If you ignore design of business, which is, can I sell this? To who? For how much? Right? Tested, qualified, pre-orders, whatever you can possibly do. That's the thing that's massive risk.
Right.
We as a design company can build you something that people will say, that is fantastic. I love that. But you may never sell one because you can't reach your market. You don't have the money from a marketing perspective to get there. It's not sustainable. So you're wasting your time. So trying to do those things, listening to experienced teams like ours in those three areas of product, process, and business, making sure that some of the key elements, we call them the highest risks or the critical risks to talk about at the time.
Right.
There's different risks that come up, but which are the ones at the beginning? Design strategy, business strategy, marketing strategy. Just enough conversation to say, okay, I know where my risks lie.
Right. Right.
And can we do anything about it? Can we collect data on it today? Right, which
Exactly.
is the big thing, right?
Exactly.
And if we can, do it now. Don't spend so much money on the product and development until you've actually quantified or qualified some key elements of risk on the design of business.
Right. Right. The can we do anything about it is a really hard lesson to learn. I think for a lot of folks, especially within companies where you're innovating, but you're also managing a career.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes things can look good inside of a company and they don't have to actually check all three of those boxes, but they can look good enough for you to be able to move and progress in your career.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a danger for big companies and small companies as well, but particularly for big companies is when you create hierarchy and bureaucracy around innovation specifically and not around creating products with an innovative mindset. The career management piece of it can sometimes cloud the actual innovating.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Jared. You come from big companies. I spent the first 15 years of my life doing big company think. We were the corporate design group.
Oh, wow.
100 people, cognitive psychologists, experimental psychologists, user interface people, industrial designers, mechanical engineers, hardware engineers. And our job was to think 10 years out in the communication industry, think 5 years out. That's why we were working on smartphones in the 90s. That's why we had separable audio and lots of things that you see coming out now, right?
Wow.
It was all based on user value. What are the hierarchies of needs? How does that turn into displays and interactions rather than everything being audio? And so that whole migration of virtual worlds, wireless worlds, led to this large team of people putting out possible product developments that never went anywhere.
Mm.
That's why I jumped and started my own company, because you can spend a lot of time. I thank this company for training me in the processes of innovation.
Right.
But the execution of reaching really high value user stuff that they couldn't get to market for the business reasons. It's not a fault.
Mm.
The timing was wrong. The whole idea of smartphones didn't come around until the full infrastructure had enough bandwidth and speed where you weren't pressing a button waiting 3 seconds.
Right.
It had to get to that point.
Right.
But everyone knew what it needed to be from a use perspective. It's just a matter of time to get there. So large companies, long time frames, people get lost in, like you say, in their careers and what they're trying to learn and do and stuff. I'm in the candy world of we can put out products every year, multiples and multiples. So I've got to my addiction level where I can participate with other companies to move as many products forward, because that's what gives me a thrill, is the fact that we've brought something useful to the world and it's a good business as well. And people can actually build companies and hire staff and grow and develop ecosystem.
Mm.
But yeah, that's the challenge for larger companies, especially with innovation departments, and how you can focus. And what we used to do in the large company is 2-year, how do we change existing products, product improvements and things, 5-year plans for where are we going. So we're projecting vision, and then a 10-year vision, just so that the business groups and the business teams can sort of see projections. And that gets modified every year. But ultimately, you're changing what you have currently. You're moving towards something that incorporates new technology and new innovation around usefulness.
Hmm.
And there's long-term vision that incorporates things like AI that's finally here. And what does that mean? But vision teams help project possible futures.
Right.
I'm a pragmatic guy, so I got out of that and into vision within the constraints of immediate business and what can we do to take on that new opportunity space that someone's identified and find a solution for it.
Mm. Yeah, that's such a great example and context for that point. And just kind of on the tail end of what you were saying, it really sort of jumps out the concept of constraints. And I think a lot of times people outside of the innovation world, when you talk about, oh, I do innovation work, they immediately think blue sky, whiteboards, post-it notes, and anything goes sort of life, which I've never experienced. So I actually value constraints. My favorite types of innovation problems to solve are the ones where there are more constraints. And maybe I'm just wired backwards, but that is what that's what really gets me going from an innovation standpoint is oh, we only have 4 degrees of freedom here, but we have to figure out how to solve this problem. How do constraints fit into your view of innovation?
The more challenging it is to be innovative, and the bigger the win and the bigger the enjoyment of it. And constraints balanced equally don't work. Prioritize constraints appropriate to the stage of the development or that process.
Mm,
I don't know if anyone's dealt with House of Quality back in the 90s. It was all about a big corporate approach to prioritizing constraints. And House of Quality gets into hundreds and thousands of trade offs and trying to figure out what's a priority and whatever. So that mental math by a team as to how do you make decisions together is actually the experience set needed for experienced teams. Training it in, you can use tools like that. There's many other ones out there now. But ultimately, you're looking for the intuitive sense of that team facilitator and that deep thinking team to say, this is a good direction for these objectives, and let's head down this path for these reasons, checking in with the client, collecting any data you possibly can, and then it's a leap of faith.
mm,
And then you're into more and more constraints, manufacturing constraints, cost constraints, supply, quality, specification constraints.
right.
And slowly, in any given project, let's, for example, say there's 100 parts. Some projects have 5,000 parts, but you count all the chips and capacitors and all the things that you have to bring together from places in the world. If you've got 100 parts, there's going to be less than 10 that are problematic.
Hmm.
Figure out which ones, focus on them early, try to figure out how you de-risk those elements, and get rid of the ones that aren't delivering on the overall objective if you can, which is part of the cost function deployment analysis,
Right.
manufacturing DFM. You can call it 20 different things.
Right.
That's not a point in time. It's something you're trying to do constantly as you go from ideas to where the risks lie and what the output would be that meets both business needs and is acceptable to users as new value.
Mm. Yes. I mean, I could unpack all this with you all day. So fun to get to chat with someone with the breadth of experience around innovation. And what I really appreciate is your nuanced language around what it means to be innovative and to do this work at a practical level. Because words matter in this space in a way that is sometimes underappreciated. And so I really appreciate that you clarify and delineate things in such a meticulous way, because I'm sure it saves your team a lot of churn and a lot of rework.
Yeah, words matter.
Yes,
Absolutely, in this world.
for sure. For sure. It's been a great conversation. Before I let you go, I would love to hear any advice you might have for innovators.
Great question. I'm in product development, so I'll say within the context of people that are predisposed to want to innovate in life, and whether it's process or product or software or hardware, I'll speak from a hardware point of view, but in hardware, determination matters.
Mm,
There is a host of obstacles, and that's why, fortunately, with AI, I think hardware is coming back in vogue. Hardware was big in the 80s and 90s, and then software trying to kind of be the place where money found itself.
right.
And now, for software to be effective, now we need data collection and we need hardware and we need devices and we need things that are useful out there that are both giving people information at the edge where the devices are, but also moving information back and forth so that the experience is the next level, wherever we're getting to with that. I won't even get into that conversation. And there's tons of positives and tons of risks, and everyone's experiencing it real time. But determination matters, and it's a long game. If you're building your skills in product development, it takes time.
Hmm.
To walk in and think that you're going to develop a product and miss all the potholes and problems that come out of not just building art, which is to design something on paper that ends up in a file folder somewhere, but to build something that ends up on a desk in a environment that people find useful, and it's there this year, next year, and 10 years from now. I like enduring products. I don't like the flash products. What can we sell quickly because there's a fad and there's something on TikTok? There are people out there in the world that want to do that. I don't want to. The way I say it is that I'm in an awful business. We create landfill.
Mm,
And if we can make it useful for longer periods of time, that's our goal.
mm,
And recycling and all the other things that help, reduce that.
right.
Ultimately, we create landfill as hardware people, as device people. And we want to be sensitive to that, but we're also bringing use to the world, and that helps us in innovation.
Mm,
So roll up your sleeves, find the mentors to guide and train, and you'll go faster if you can do that. You need to be 20 products in, 100 products in, 200 products in if you really want to be able to navigate and facilitate technically challenging product developments
mm,
and participate in teams that do that. It's very rewarding. It's amazing. It's an addiction, as I said earlier. It's candy. There's so much joy in it. There's so much passion that comes from it. You can create really collaborative teams like we have. Just get up every day and innovate. And I'd already mentioned bringing real value to the situation. Look for projects and products where there is real value being brought to the world. And sometimes that's just an altruistic statement. You've got to learn somewhere, you've got to train somewhere, you've got to develop your skills somewhere, and the world needs you. So determination, keep going, and reach out to companies like ours to help with the process when you have that opportunity.
That's fantastic advice, and so much there to appreciate and to adopt into how you work and how you view the world. So thank you for sharing that. Where can people find more about your company or follow you? How can people get more of Kevin Bailey?
The best way to find out about our company, Design First, design1st.com. So Design1st, you'll find us there. And we're all over the web. So it's easy to find what we do, how we do it, the many, many different projects we've done. Reaching me directly is a more difficult task.
Of course, yes.
I'm the CEO. I sit in the background. Anybody that knows the internet can reach out and find me. That's an easy thing to do as well. So I appreciate you asking that question.
Sure. Kevin Bailey, thank you so much for your time and insights around innovation, the importance of deep thinking, criticality of the teams and managing those teams effectively and marshaling those teams around an opportunity. I appreciate you making the time and hope we can stay connected.
Thank you very much, Jared. I know you're in product development too, and I wish you the best in what you're doing, and any collaboration we can do. I'd love to get involved.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get more insights from innovators across the world. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content and conversation. I hope to see you there. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.